Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, also the managing editor over at SB Nation's Wide Right Natty Light. And here following a bye week, and Iowa State is 5-2, headed into this weekend in a big matchup with BYU, who is 7-0 and currently ranked number 11 in the AP poll. And just another big game here for Iowa State. You know, they've played a bunch of power. They've played five Power 5 opponents already, and getting ready to play their sixth. BYU is coming off of an emotional win in their rivalry game against Utah, the Holy War, in which they were successful in running the ball. They really took it to Utah physically. Didn't really just kind of did what BYU does: run the ball, play good defense. They don't really blow you away with the passing game, but they just kind of they're just a well-coached team. They don't commit a lot of penalties. They just do a good job. And this is for better or worse, this is a very similar matchup physically and just kind of stylistically to Cincinnati. Their defense doesn't play exactly the same scheme, but on offense especially, it's a run-heavy team with a quarterback that is a better runner than thrower. They run the ball about 60% of the time. They're physical. Their running back is going to try to run some people over. The offensive line is going to try to push people around. Defensively, they're solid. They tackle well. They do a lot of things really well. So as far as I would say defending BYU, it's a difficult matchup. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. We did get some fun news today, though. We got some fun news in the form of some injury updates, which we will talk about that as well. Some fun, some not so fun. But I appreciate everybody kind of jumping into the stream now. And as always, welcome comments and stuff and such like that. If anybody wants to jump in and wants to call into the show and give their thoughts, just let me know, and I will certainly be happy to share the link with you to join in. And always happy to take questions and answer those right on the stream as well. So the big injury update that we got is that Kyle Conradi, the one true son of the kicking profession, is potentially he is quote he is trending up and is likely to play this weekend. Does that mean he's 100%? I don't know. I hope he is. I really, with what appeared with the injury that he appeared to have, I really hope that they're not sending him out too early. Obviously, not having Kyle arguably was almost the entire reason you lost to Cincinnati. Not the entire reason, obviously, but like was a major factor in why you lose the Cincinnati game. And there's a very good argument to be made that he had a major part to play in not losing that Colorado game. So, but even if he's not healthy enough to, if he is healthy enough to take a 35-yard field goal and feel okay about it, then I'm good with that. Like, I don't need anything more. Brian's the other direction here. He says if he can do kickoffs but not field goals, that's good enough. I'm not a kicking expert per se, but I would have to imagine that kickoffs are a bigger strain. Are a bigger strain on you physically than place kicking, but I guess I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it, kickoffs, you do get a running start at it, but you're trying to kick the ball as far as you can. So like you're putting max power on it basically. Whereas a place kick, you're obviously a little bit more measured run up and all that. Either way, hopefully he's just 100% healthy and none of that actually matters. But at a minimum, if he can take short field goals, if he can get you a 35-yarder, like if you can park it at the 25-yard line or something like that and kick it and be okay with that, like I'm good. I'm okay with that because that gives Iowa State that gives them a lot of leeway and gives them a nice safety blanket in the red zone where they can take some shots and try to win some one-on-one battles, which It's going to be, I think that's one of the ways that I would say it's going to be able to get an advantage in this one is by starting to be more efficient in the red zone. Unfortunately, I would say it's been pretty bad in the red zone. Fortunately, in this matchup, BYU has been actually worse in the red zone this season. They've been almost even more inefficient than Iowa State has, and but Iowa State has also been missing any ability to kick field goals whatsoever the last few weeks. So, by missing that, by getting Kyle back, even if you start getting stuffed in the red zone a little bit more, or a little bit, it's not necessarily the end of the world because you can at least come out with field goals, knowing that at some point during the game, BYU will probably stall out in the red zone at some point as well. That said, Iowa State has Iowa State's kind of red zone predicament is a little bit strange. Um, they're allowing points on nearly every red zone trip that the opponent makes, but it's mostly field goals. They're doing actually a pretty good job of staying sturdy in the red zone and not allowing a ton of touchdowns, but they are allowing plenty of field goals, which kind of it's sort of like 3-point shooting in basketball, in which like in the end you can defend it as best as you can and try to keep them as far back as you can, but in the end, if the other player makes it, they make it type of thing. So, you know, but what it does mean though is Iowa State is doing a good job to holding people to field goals instead of touchdowns in the red zone for the most part. It's not universal, and it's obviously not been as strong since you lose Jeremiah Cooper and Jontez Williams, but they've been getting better. The corners last week I thought played an okay game. There was a couple spots where they got exposed a little bit, but for the most part, I thought the defense played a pretty good game. You didn't really see the corners really get burnt too much. There was a couple blown coverages. One of them, especially like Jamison Patton, was nowhere close to where he needed to be. But for the larger part of the game, I thought the corners played pretty decent. Trey Bell and Quentin Taylor, I thought they did a pretty solid job. David Coffey had an okay game. Um, so I'm not necessarily discouraged too much on the defense, and BYU is definitely they're a 60-40 run team. They're gonna try to run right at Iowa State. Uh, Unfortunately, the other part of the good news for Iowa State on the injury front is that Carson Hansen is expected to be back, which is nice. He's your Iowa State loves to use him as their goal line back, if they're down back, stuff like that, or short yardage situations back, that kind of thing. Having that hammer that can run the ball up the middle is obviously super valuable and it helps you finish off some of these drives. But either way, the bad news on the injury front though is that that Dom Orange missed practice yesterday, I believe, and is questionable for Saturday. You kind of want I don't know if that we don't know if that injury, if he picked it up over the bye week or anything like that, or um if it's just the injury that he picked up against Arizona and he just played through it for a couple of games and then just doesn't think he can do it anymore type of thing. Not sure exactly what's going on there, but that's a big loss. I mean, Dom Orange is Dom Orange. When he's at his best, he's one of the best defensive tackles in the country. Um, and when you're going up against a super physical team like BYU that wants to run the ball between the tackles, not necessarily just between the tackles, but they like to be really physical between the tackles. Their running back is a really strong runner. Um, Not as quick, so he's not as good like out wide and in space. But when he can kind of weave through traffic a little bit and try to beat a bit defender 1-on-1, he's really good. And LJ Martin, I believe, is his name. And he, you know, when you're going up against a team like that wants to bully you in the running game, just like Cincinnati did to Iowa State a few weeks ago, that's a concerning situation. You would absolutely much rather have Dom Orange back there, rather than trying to figure out something with Elijah Carnell or a freshman, a redshirt freshman coming in and uh, getting lots and lots of playing time. You'd prefer to not have that happen, um, but it kind of is what it is at this point. I mean, it felt like it just feels like Iowa State can't shake this injury bug. it's kind of beyond description at this point. Hopefully we can get some Tomatoa production at edge for DL pressure. Hopefully, I think he was injured a couple weeks ago. I know he was injured for the Cincinnati game. I don't remember if he was for the Colorado game or not. But hopefully, yeah, obviously Tomatoa McDonough, Vontre Malone, um, Trey Verdon, any of those guys doing anything off the edge. Kenny Eziogu, who should be a lot better than he is. Um, it's there's a lot of those things that need to get a lot better. But losing Dom Orange and taking the pressure off of the interior of that line and letting them dedicate more pressure to defensive ends that are already struggling to get to the quarterback is not ideal. I mean, there's not a lot more to it, frankly. Is that it's that injury sucks. About half the Holy War from what I saw. About BYU defensive line had their way with the Utah offensive line. Yeah, that's concerning. I mean, no doubt about it. Yeah, I think generally speaking, this year I would say its offensive line has been solid. They're not world beaters. They're not incredible, but they're solid. They're good enough, I think. And we saw them push around Iowa's defensive line. We saw them push around Arizona. We saw them have some really good games so far. The second half against Kansas State, they were very good. Obviously, South Dakota, they're very good. But then they get pushed around against Cincinnati quite a bit, quite a lot against Cincinnati. And then Colorado, they don't get anything going. They really can't get a lot moving. The offensive line was pretty bad against Colorado. So naturally, when you go have a BYU defensive line that's playing well, and they do really well against Utah's good offensive line, that's a point of concern. I mean, I would put Iowa's defensive line up against anybody's in college football. And if they're able to push around Iowa's defensive line, there is a reason to believe that at some point they absolutely can do what they need to do to BYU's defensive line. But the 2-game stretch here is not giving you a lot of confidence. Brian says screens and quick pass game. Expecting a little no push in the run game at least start. Yeah, I mean, what they weren't getting any push against Colorado, and what they did, there's a few things they did well and a few things they didn't well. In the running game, I think they did a good job with Abu and getting him outside the tackles, especially if your offensive line isn't getting a lot of push in the running game, and you can turn that around on him and get Abu Sama outside the tackles, which is kind of where he wants to be anyways. He wants to be in space where he can make guys miss. And they did a good job with that. What they didn't do is a great job where they didn't do a great job in the passing game, where Colorado loves to play lots of man defense. And if your offensive line isn't getting a lot of push and they're playing against man defense, what do you run? If anybody in the chat knows what you run, what kind of routes you run against man, the easy answer is you run lots and lots of crossing routes, slants, drags, ins, outs, things like that. Like that's the kind of stuff that you run against man. The farther you can make a defender run horizontally, the more success you're going to have against man. And obviously it's got some speed underneath. Xavier Townsend can move. If they ever bring Zay Robinson out, they can get him doing something. But they've got guys that can run around a little bit, especially like Xavier Townsend. Against a team that's running heavy man, getting that guy on drag routes and stuff like that, where he can use his speed to his advantage on those crossing routes. Man, I don't know why they didn't get after him more. Arizona plays a little bit different defense, plays a different defense than Colorado, but you attack them in roughly the same way, which is you just pound and pound and pound in the slants and in the crossing game to essentially take advantage of guys that are trying to win one-on-one matchups, and they're playing close coverage. They're doing lots of things, and the more cuts you can add to that, the better chance you have of your receivers getting open. And unfortunately, nobody was getting open, but Rocco was also not particularly accurate against Colorado. He had a rough game, and it was a second rough game in a row. The genesis of it seems to be when he took that hit against Arizona and hit the back of his head, went to the tent, came back, and we thought he was fine. But he wasn't awesome in the second half, but he didn't need to be. Then he gets to the Cincinnati game and he's a little off, and then he takes that huge hit and he's been just bad since then. I mean, just he's made some throws, and then some other throws are just not close. There, he's just gunning them underneath. He's he's not putting touch where he needs to. He's missing left and right sometimes, which is not typically what you see a lot from Rocco. Typically, you might see him miss long or short, but you typically don't see him miss left or right too often, um, which is kind of an odd thing for him. Hopefully 2 weeks off has had to give him a chance to kind of settle down a little bit and get back to uh, a game flow where it feels like the game is moving slower. Because we saw Rocco at the beginning of the season, against Kansas State, against South Dakota, Arizona, Iowa, where it was very clear that the game had slowed down for Rocco and that he was processing really quickly, making great throws, making good decisions, never felt like he was getting rushed or that he was, forcing anything. And the last two games, it's felt like he's been sped up, feel like he's not comfortable standing in the pocket, and he's missed a few throws. And Fred's got a great point here. Unfortunately, if the receivers could actually catch the ball, that would help a lot. And he's exactly right. There's a few different situations in that game that like Rocco and Taylor Mauser deserve some criticism for the plays or the calls that they made, but there was, for the most part, the game plan was plenty good enough in between the 20s to win that game if the receivers do a better job getting open and then don't drop 100 passes. Gabe Burkle even dropped one, probably the best hands on the team, and Gabe Burkle dropped one. And you've got Brett Eskelson dropping one early where Rocco would throw it a little bit behind him. You'd like to have, you'd think if you're a receiver, you wish you had that back and you wish you could catch that. But, the throw wasn't great, so you can kind of excuse it. The second one, the throw hits him in the face mask and he completely misses it. And I believe Dom Overby missed one. I know Gabe Burkle missed one. There was a couple of other throws that like Chase Soul maybe could have had, but they weren't great throws. Abu Sama had a tough one where Rocco missed the throw, but if Abu was able to come down with it somehow, he was gone down the sideline. And they gotta do a better job executing that stuff. And hopefully Rocco has had, over these 2 weeks, had a chance to find some clarity, slow himself down, get more comfortable again, and get back to the Rocco that we saw at the beginning of the season, who was, I would argue, like should have had more conversation, like in the Heisman conversation. He should have had more airtime in the Heisman conversation through the first, 4 or 5 games of the season. And, frankly, I would say can't win this game unless Rocco has found that spot and is playing better. Fred wants to know what can be done during the bye week with the dropsies. Well, the best way to fix both problems, two birds with one stone, with Rocco missing throws and the receivers drop passes, is for those guys to be on the field or in the practice facility running routes over and over and over and over and over again. If anybody in that quarterback room or the wide receiver room went home this past weekend instead of sitting in that practice facility and running routes and getting on time, getting reps, getting back to where they need to be, if they weren't doing that and they decided to take the weekend off or whatever, then I mean, that is not part of the process. Frank, to put it as politically as I can, that's not winning football. If you took this weekend off or you went home or whatever it is, instead of trying to get better, trying to fix the drop issues, trying to fix the accuracy issues, that's not winning football. There's something to be said for being able to take a mental break and stuff like that, but you should do that when you can. But unfortunately, the play the last 2 games has not earned you taking a Saturday off, taking that Saturday off on your bye week. So that's how you fix it. You run reps over and over and over again. You're throwing and catching a couple hundred balls on Saturday or something like that. You're doing a lot. You're just running your routes. You're being sharp. Rocco's making good throws. They're making good catches. All that. It's just running reps. That's all there is to it, really. We've talked about this before on Down the Pipe and Natty Light with March, and other times when they've had drop issues, and it's reps and reps and reps and reps. There's not like a lot there. There's a mental part of it, but the way you get out of the mental part of it is you have to see yourself catch the ball. It's kind of like in golf. There's a kind of like there, not to get too far into this, but the idea, if you're in a funk, if you're a golfer and you're in a funk and you're having trouble putting or whatever it is, physically watching the ball go into the hole and hearing it hit the bottom of the cup and finishing out the rep is a great way to kind of start grounding yourself a little bit and getting yourself back into the mental space that you want to be in. And for Rocco and the receivers, completing passes, just going into the facility, running good routes, running crisp routes, completing those passes and getting back into a rhythm is the best thing that they could possibly do. Now, the offensive line needs to get their shit together and do a good job giving Rocco time to throw and keeping him off his butt. But, this is, as far as the pass catching issue, it's just reps. Fortunately, BYU is actually not all that great at they're not very good at getting to the passer. They don't sack the quarterback a lot. They don't necessarily get a ton of pressures. It's a defensive line that in the running game can move people around a little bit and make it difficult to run, between the tackles against them. But as far as, pressuring the passer and disrupting the passing game with the defensive line, they're not, for as good a defense as they are, they're not as good at rushing the passer as you would think they are. So that's spot. Hopefully they can get some more time and, find, and I have faith that they will have a decent game plan for this. The last 2 years, Iowa State's been able to move the ball against BYU, or the last 2 meetings, I should say, they've been able to even move the ball against BYU. Granted, they or not the last 2 meetings, the last meeting they were able to move the ball against BYU, but different team. But it's one of those things where if Iowa State executes and they're crisp, they get rid of some of these procedure penalties, the receivers catch the fucking ball. And they get at least a little bit of running game going at some point. It doesn't need to be a dominant run game. You don't need Abu to go for $180 like he did against Colorado. You don't need that. But if you can just keep the ball moving between the 20s, get into the red zone, try to get the touchdowns. You don't want to settle for too many field goals, but in this game, a field goal is not necessarily the worst. A field goal isn't a failure. Just because I really think this game's gonna be fairly low scoring. It's BYU is not a high flying team or anything like that. They just want to run the ball. They play good defense, and it's not like that different from playing stylistically. It's not that different from playing Iowa. Bear Bachmeier is a little bit better thrower than Gronowski is, but both teams are going to want to ground and pound, control the clock, stay disciplined, all that. Don't turn the ball over. Speaking of which, this needs to be a game where Iowa State needs to get a turnover or 2 in this game. If Iowa State gets behind in this game, and if BYU is allowed to play with a lead, I have concerns. We'll have to see what the offense looks like, but based on what's been happening now, if Iowa State isn't playing with a lead for most of this game, and they're playing from behind trying to catch up to BYU, I am very concerned, because at some point, BYU's running game can wear down the defense, and they can kind of just take the air out of the ball and just clock, and just sit on their defense basically to try to win the game for them. So if I'm Iowa State, I want to get out to a hot start. I'm trying to get out to a lead and make BYU play from behind all day. Let the crowd get into it. Make this your home game. Make this one of those games that we get. It seems like we get one or two a season where it's just like this big emphatic home game with a big time crowd. Iowa State comes out and they show out and have a really good game. against a good opponent. Against a good opponent. Last year there was a few of them, but mainly the main one, obviously, the main one I think of is the whiteout against Baylor. Baylor was a decent team last year, and you come out and you just dominate that game. You dominate that game for the past the last 3 quarters. The crowd's awesome, the environment's awesome, everything's great. The whiteout this year obviously was very good. Once again, blew out Arizona. That's all great. But this is the game. If you're going to have that big, like, soul cleansing home win that we seem to get one or two of those a year, this is a perfect candidate for it. BYU is a good team, but they're not like incredible. They beat BYU, they beat Utah, which is great, but otherwise don't have a particularly impressive resume. And what's even more notable for them is that they're coming off the Holy War, which is an emotionally exhausting week for them. And then they've got to go to Lubbock next week, which they could absolutely be caught looking ahead towards. And yeah, so it's kind of a tough spot for BYU. They've got that emotional win at home. They're on the road. They're an underdog on the road as a ranked team against an unranked team, and then they've got a big game next week. That's a trap spot for a lot of teams. So up to this point in the season, BYU they beat Southern Illinois, or sorry, wrong season. I'm looking at the wrong season. Damn it. Okay, so start the season. They blasted Portland State, who's bad. They blasted Stanford, who did just beat Florida State, but they're not very good. Blasted East Carolina, bad. They beat Colorado by 3, and obviously, we lost to Colorado, but we were down 2 All-American corners, and they weren't. They beat West Virginia by 2 touchdowns, then beat Arizona by 6, and then beat Utah by 3. This is not a team that's like dominating good teams. They're scraping by good teams. They're beating bad teams by a little bit, and they're blowing out really bad teams. So they're not unbeatable. They don't blow you away offensively. If you can get a couple red zone touchdowns and get a couple field goals and hold them to some field goals in the red zone, and limit the big plays, there's a clear path to victory for Iowa State here. Just out execute BYU, which sounds, which with as good as solid as rock solid as BYU is, that's not like an easy task, but that is like, it's a straightforward task. And it's like, you just need to be sharper. You need to commit fewer penalties. You need to make better throws. You need to make the catches. You need to make a guy miss. If you can get a turnover, great. A turnover in this game is going to be massive. So really, really can't afford to turn the ball over to BYU. Which means Rocco cannot be throwing picks. If you're going to throw the fade ball in the end zone, throw a fade ball. Don't throw a goddamn bullet directly to the back. You don't be throwing bullets to the back shoulder on a fade ball. Get that thing up and let your 6'7" tight ends just out jump the guy that's trying to defend them. If you can do that, and especially if you can get to a good start and play from ahead most of this game, Iowa State is good enough to get ahead and just stay ahead and just keep BYU back. So, that's all there is to it, really. It sounds complex. It sounds simple. And the game plan wasn't dissimilar from Cincinnati and Colorado, and they just didn't execute. In the last few seasons, Iowa State loses 2 in a row, and then they go back and they win more, and then they win a few in a row. Fred says limiting terrible calls by the refs in the end zone will help us win. Brian says can't leave it up to them. Still had opportunities to win both games despite bad calls or non-existent run defense. You're both right. You're both correct. The Colorado one is interesting because the Big 12 Conference actually made a statement saying that the pass interference being picked up in the end zone was incorrect. And you could absolutely make the argument that completely shifted how the game was going. Iowa State had a chance to, I believe, take a lead there or take a lead or tie it up. And, they would have gotten a first down, they would have gotten first and goal on like the 1 yard line. They probably score there. So, they essentially took a touchdown off the board and gave it right back to Colorado. So, that was potentially a 14-point swing. And, like I said, they still had plenty of opportunities all game to get it done, but that call absolutely changed how things were going. It changed the flow of the game, just changed how everything was happening. So, you know, there's not a lot you can do about the refs. Sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're good. It just kind of is what it is. You got to play with it. But, you know, I don't know. It is what it is. However, so I want to talk a little about how I would attack BYU. And especially in this, you need to get better at being you need to get better in the red zone. Specifically, what's confounding to me a little bit is in the middle of the field, Iowa State will they'll spread the ball around, they'll get the tight ends involved, they'll run the pop pass, they'll run, Bramer up the seam. They'll do lots of that stuff in the middle of the field between the 20s. They'll do a great job of spreading the ball around, and they're pretty good at keeping the ball moving. Then when they get to the red zone, they tend to start getting cute. They tend to start running, some screens that they ordinarily don't run. They run some odd running formations like they do. And then once you get inside the 10-yard line, once you get inside the 5-yard line and they start getting into like goal line situations, suddenly they turn into like this like single wing split offense. It's stupid. The running game turns back to the 1970s. And I really do like the Maryland eye that they line up in from time to time. I think it's really difficult to stop when you've got tight ends as good as Iowa State, and you got lead blockers that can really do a great job blocking through the A gap on that type of stuff. That's all great. Or you can run a sneak out of it, that too. But when you start getting in some of these other ones where they get overly cute and it's running plays that take too long to develop and things like that, they just don't work as well. And if you try to get too cute down the goal line, that stuff just doesn't work sometimes. So they need to get more straightforward at the goal line. I mean, you don't want to be predictable, but doing some excessively cute things and trying to kind of 4D chess your way out of this thing isn't always a good strategy. And it hasn't been a good strategy for Iowa State so far this season. Hopefully having Kyle back gives them some confidence and gives them some prerogative to be more aggressive in the red zone, take some more shots. When that way, if you're not terrified of not making a first down on the 20-yard line, if you're on the 20-yard line, you need to get to the 10 to make the first down, but you don't have a field goal kicker that you feel good with outside of extra point situations. All of a sudden, getting to the 10-yard line is your entire focus. When you're in the red zone, getting the end zone should be your focus. And you have a first down available to you if you don't quite make it. But if you're scared of not being able to kick a ball, then suddenly you're scared of not getting to the 10-yard line, not getting to the goal line. And you get more conservative in your play calling. You tend to get a little too cute. And you don't try to get chunks of yardage that are otherwise available to you because you're just trying to take the safe play and keep the ball moving. So getting Kyle back, hopefully, I think helps that. And where, they are more aggressive, they push for the end zone a little bit harder, knowing that it's okay if we don't make it because Kyle's there, he'll get us 3 points and we can go and rely on our defense again. So we'll see. I mean, that's my theory. I don't know if that's how it's going to work, but that's my theory. And I like the sound of that. Other than that, I mean, like I said, I think Taylor Mauser's done a good job in the middle of the field. They're moving the ball. His game plan would look a lot better if the receivers would catch the damn ball. And we'll see how they manage having both running backs back. Giving Abu, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I think I said it on this. I think I said it last week too. That giving Abu an entire game's worth of carries, giving him 15, 20, 25 carries in a game. Giving him that allowed him to get in a rhythm and be a lot more successful in the running game than when he's only getting, 10 or 12 carries and and they're sporadic throughout the game and you can't really get a good feel for how everything's working, and all that. Fred's right there. I always seem to get stronger as the game went on. Totally agree. It was very clear to me that giving him more work and letting him get in a rhythm was like the best thing for him. It was very obvious to me that it's like this kid just needs more carries. Like he just needs to be allowed to actually get into a rhythm rather than trying to split carries 50-50. I hate to see like Carson Hansen fall by the wayside, and he's not going to because he's too good of a running back. But if if you can let Abu be your main dude on first and second down, maybe third and long, but first and second down for sure, and let him get some more carries, get some more touches, and get in a rhythm throughout the game, and then use Carson in short yardage situations, third and shorts, goal lines, things like that, where you really need, where you want to run with power, and you want to just try to convert short yardage situations. Carson Hansen's awesome for that, and let him be that. I think, but the Colorado game showed to me that Abu is a better back than he was last year. He's ready. If Carson Hansen wasn't there and he was allowed to be the bell cow back, I think Abu would be having a pretty awesome season. And I'm not saying that Carson Hansen is holding Abu back. What I am saying though is that because of the type of running back that Abu is and where he's at in his career and just kind of how he operates, him having to split carries 50-50 with Carson Hansen is preventing him from being as good as he could be. How you balance that with Hansen and trying to get him more touches, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly how you balance that. And then Dylan Lee got a few carries against Colorado. I'm not sure how he figures into it. Um, this is he says, I love Hansen, but I've seen enough with Sama to think that if we can only have one healthy between Sama and Hansen, I'm taking, you say Dom, but we'll say Sama and Hansen, I'm taking Sama. And I think that's kind of really my point is like, if you had to have one of them and not the other one, the Colorado game showed me that Abu's ceiling is higher and his floor gets a lot higher as he gets more touches throughout the game. And maybe the Colorado game was just enough for him to get to feel like he was in a rhythm and to start to get a feel for how he needed to do things. And even splitting carries going forward, he'll be better. But man, it's hard not to look at 180 yards against Colorado and think, man, maybe we just need to get this kid more touches. We just need to, maybe that's the kicker. The kicker here is that we just need to get him more carries. We'll see. We'll see how he handles BYU, who's a very physical defense. They're a good run stopping defense. Or I mean, they're frankly they're good at pretty much everything. Um, we'll see how he handles that. We'll see how they handle that with the game plan. But if we have another game where Sama starts the game, plays the first quarter and a half or something like that, and he's really getting onto a roll. I don't think you just take him out for Hansen just for the sake of splitting carries. I think you gotta keep running with the hot hand. And if that means if Hansen's injury is how we figure out that Abu is ready to be a full-time back, he's ready to be a bell cow back and get 25 carries a game, then it is what it is. And you'd hate, like I said, you don't want to see Hansen just go away or to see him like kind of like slowly disappear because Sama's taking all of his run shares. But I was saying he needs to win football games. And that's not saying they can't win with Hansen, but what I'm saying is that we got a buck 80 out of Abu Sama from Colorado in his first full game of carries. And Hansen I think he's only broken 100 yards once in his career. I mean, I don't know what else you need to see, I guess. you know, in the past, like if you look at like in the games like in his true freshman season when Abu was given a full load of carries and was allowed to just be the back, it was really good. And as he's been splitting carries, he's not as effective because he's not able to be in a rhythm, not able to get stronger throughout the game because it's just too sporadic. Yeah, with this coaching staff, will never know Hanson's true health, so limiting him a bit this weekend will probably help both him and Abu. Frankly, if Hansen is not 100% or as close to 100% as he can be, then I think you limit him. I think you're absolutely right. I think we saw enough from Abu that if Abu is 100% 100% ready to go, and Hansen is still on his way back. Let Abu do his thing. Let him break one off. I just he obviously needs to find some consistency in the running game, and it just seems to me like Abu is the guy right now, and we'll see how they manage it this Saturday. And I think the Saturday will tell you a lot whether they believe that Abu can be the guy, or if they feel as though Carson Hansen is just too good to keep off the field, or what the situation is. It could mean a lot of different things, but we'll see. We'll see on Saturday. Oh my gosh, and Brian's absolutely right here. My heart would drop with Peppers one snap. Man, that was heartbreaking, man. Because not to it's just like as soon as we were, when we did back in January, when we did our episode, when we did what the week show was about the recruiting class and talking about going through different guys. We watched some River Peppers film, and we were, and I think everybody in the chat was like, man, this kid can be really good. This River Peppers kid seems really, really, really solid. We heard lots about him in camp and in the off season. Like, man, this kid might be there. And then he was injured for the first part of the season. Finally gets a chance to come on the field against Colorado, and first play, man, just it looked to me like an Achilles, and I think they confirmed that he's out for the season. Man, that sucks. Especially if it's an Achilles, we're in early October. If it's an Achilles, he's not playing until November of next year. Like it's not like he's out for the year and he'll be back. It's not like an ACL where he's out for the year, but he'll be back again. He'll be back for fall camp next year. He's out for this year. He's getting surgery on Monday, and then he gets hurt. He's getting surgery on Monday, and he's out for the next 12 months at least. Fred, that was non-contact. I heard so many comments how bad the playing surface was. Yeah, it was a non-contact injury. I think I tweeted out from the main account almost immediately that field turf needs to be banned, because artificial turf at this point is just, it's easy to see the data's there. That artificial turf is just not safe it's not all that safe to play on. It's certainly not as safe as natural grass. Do you get more grip, especially, do you get more grip? Generally speaking, yes, but you're not immune to slipping on artificial turf either. We saw that a bunch at Colorado's fields that people are still slipping around. Yeah, this is a joke. Using the wood chips instead of rubber pellets is a fucking joke. That is some Bush League bullshit from Colorado. There's a reason they're in Pac-12, and frankly, that school deserves to be back in the Pac-12 for some of that minor league bullshit. That's garbage, and it should not be a thing. It's that Colorado is an unserious football program. It's an unserious school, unserious fan base. I'm so tired of them being in the conference. They sucked. They just haven't been. Colorado has been, unfortunately, Deion Sanders has made them a TV ratings darling up to this point. But otherwise, Colorado has provided basically nothing to the conference except for people trying to watch to see what Deion does. And they watched two good players last season. But otherwise, they've been terrible. It's the facilities are that of a G5 school, or a low G5 school. I've heard, the horror stories about their fans. Colorado is just a bad school in the conference. Like they're not like a positive member. They're not a positive contributor to the conference outside of the TV ratings for their football team and their football team alone. But their football team didn't even win. They didn't even get to the Big 12 title game last year. They're not going to get, they're bad this year. Deion Sanders might be gone after this year, either due to health, hopefully not, or he just, he's going to go do something else. Who knows if he's going to stick around there very long. And, this is, I can't say enough negative things about Colorado. At least Utah has done this last year they didn't do anything. They didn't win anything that mattered. At least this year, their football team seems competent enough. But Utah has been a big nothing burger so far. UCF sucks. They haven't been good at anything. So the three worst fan bases in the conference, UCF, Utah, and Colorado, have all been terrible pretty much universally at everything since they got into the conference, and they have been really, really awful to deal with. So I'm quite displeased with all three of their inclusions in the Big 12, but it is what it is. Otherwise, BYU, in contrast, BYU's teams have been very good. They've been very competitive in pretty much every sport. Their fans are almost too nice. You know, the school aside, which that's a whole thing, that's a different podcast. But the sports teams and their fans can't have enough nice things to say about BYU. And I'm looking forward to playing them this weekend. I'm hoping plenty of BYU fans will make the trip over. I know, obviously Iowa does not have a massive population from the Church of Latter-day Saints, but hopefully some of them make the trip and get a chance to check out our stadium after a bunch of us, a bunch of our fans went out to Provo last year. Yeah, this is Brian's here. He's like, hey, playing BYU, but we're objectively great as an athletic department. That's where it's at. It's like wherever your stance is, like however you feel about BYU, the school, independent of that, as an athletic program, they have been awesome. But anyways, so this weekend, it's a winnable game for Iowa State. This absolutely can be that feel good home win that we seem to get, once or twice a season. You get one of those, get back right. You've got Kyle Conradi back, hopefully. You've got Carson Hansen back. We'll see about Dom Orange. I think Elijah Carnell has played decent this season. I think maybe with a full game of reps for him, maybe that's a good springboard for him. We'll see, but we'll go to a prediction. I believe on Down the Pipe and Natty Light, I predicted 20-17 Iowa State. I think I still like that score now that 24 hours later, I still like that score. It's I'm picking the under. If you're a betting person, I'm taking the under. Taking Iowa State right now. I think technically to cover. I think they're a 2.5 point favorite right now, but this is a game that is going to be tight. One turnover can change this whole thing, and hopefully BYU is the one that commits the turnover. Hopefully obviously the procedure penalty issues the last couple of games have been fixed. Hopefully Rocco's back up. If all of those things happen, Iowa State can win this thing, and then there's a reason that they're favored, and they can get right back on the horse and get to 6-2 with a win over a number 11 team, and maybe get back in the rankings. So that's my prediction. 20-17 Iowa State this weekend is my prediction. For any of you that are going to be in the tailgate lots on Saturday, hope to see you around. I might not be there like right when the lots open because I've got to drive from Kansas City on Saturday morning. So depending on how early I can get up from this was after a wedding on Friday night. So I have a wedding Friday night in Kansas City, and then I'm driving up to the game on Saturday morning. Hopefully leaving Kansas City about 5 o'clock in the morning. We'll see. But we'll see. But if anyone is going to be in the lots and wants to stop by, we're always over there in C3, and you can come hang out with us. So everybody, thank you for watching. Appreciate all the comments and all the conversation in the chat. And we will see you guys on Saturday. Everybody have a great rest of your week, and go Cyclones.